A man kneels in the cold stone hall. His hands tremble, not from fear, though fear lives in him too, but from the weight of what comes next. Above him stands a lord, draped in wool and iron. Torchlight flickers across faces frozen in silence. This is not a celebration. This is a transaction, and the currency is a human soul. The kneeling man places his hands together, as if in prayer. But he does not pray to God. He prays to the man before him. Wait, and when he speaks the words, "I am your man," his old life ends. His freedom dies in that breath. Everything he was belongs now to someone else. This was fealty, and it cost more than most there ever understood. The medieval world was not built on love. It was built on chains, invisible ones forged from oaths, obligations, and the crushing need to survive. A peasant could not simply live. He had to belong to someone. A knight could not simply fight. He had to kneel first. Even lords, proud and wealthy, bowed their heads to kings. No one was free. Everyone owed something to someone. And the moment a man swore fealty, the clock began ticking on everything he would sacrifice. Let us be clear about what fealty meant. It was not a job. It was not a contract one could break and walk away from. Fealty was a bond sealed by sacred oath, witnessed by God and men, punishable by death if betrayed. The man who swore it handed over his sword, his lands, his harvests, his children, like his future. In return, he received protection, or at least the promise of it. But promises in the medieval world were paid for in blood. Consider the peasant, born into the dirt, raised in a hut of mud and straw with smoke-blackened walls and a floor of packed earth. He owned nothing. The land beneath his feet belonged to a lord. The crops he planted half went to his master. The animals he raised, taxed. The bread he baked, taxed. Even the air he breathed seemed rented. When his lord called for labor, he gave it. When his lord demanded carts and oxen for war, he gave those too. And when the lord swore fealty to a greater power, the peasant's fate was dragged along. This man never knelt in a great hall. He never placed his hands between a lord's palms. But he lived beneath fealty's shadow every single day. The system crushed him quietly, invisibly. He worked until his back curved like a bow. He buried children who starved in winters that came too early. And through it all, he was told this was God's order. This was how the world must be. The cost of fealty for him? His entire existence. But what of the knight? Surely he benefited. Surely the warrior who swore loyalty to a lord lived a life of glory. This is what the stories say. The ballads and the tapestries. The shining armor and the pennants streaming in the wind. The truth was uglier. A knight who swore fealty became a weapon. His body was no longer his own. When his lord declared war, he rode. It did not matter if the cause was just or foolish. It did not matter if victory was possible or if death waited over the next hill. He rode because he swore. And oath-breakers were not simply punished. They were erased, stripped of lands, stripped of titles, cast out as men without honor, which in the medieval mind was worse than being cast into the grave. So the knight obeyed. He fought in freezing rain and summer heat. He starved during long sieges. Yet he watched brothers fall beside him, choking on blood and mud. And when the battle ended, if he survived, he returned home to find his fields untended, his family strained, his coffers drained by the cost of armor and horses and the endless needs of war. The Lord took his 40 days of military service each year, sometimes more, sometimes far more, and the knight gave them because he had no choice. His oath demanded it, but the cost did not end on the battlefield. Fealty wove itself into every part of a knight's life. He could not marry without his lord's permission. His children could not inherit without paying fees. When he died, his lord took a portion of everything he owned, a death tax, a final extraction, a reminder that even in the grave, the oath still held. And if the knight failed, if he refused to fight, or fled from battle, or whispered disloyalty in dark corners, then came the reckoning. His lands were seized, his family was cast out. His name was spoken with disgust. In some cases, he was hunted, killed, made an example so that others would remember what fealty truly meant. It meant everything. It meant forever. Now consider the Lord himself. One might think he sat atop this pyramid, safe and comfortable, collecting oaths like coins. But lords, too, were bound. They swore fealty to earls. Earls swore to dukes. Dukes swore to kings. And kings, some of them, swore to emperors or popes. I tangled in webs of loyalty so complex that no one could move without pulling a dozen threads. The lord who received a knight's oath also made a promise. Protection. If that knight's lands were invaded, the lord had to respond. If that knight's family was threatened, the lord had to act. This was the bargain. Loyalty in exchange for safety. But safety was expensive. Wars were constant. Enemies multiplied. And the lord who could not protect his vassals lost them. Not through betrayal, but through death. Failed protection meant failed oaths, and failed oaths meant a crumbling power base. So lords, too, paid the cost. They paid in gold spent on armies. They paid in sons sent to fight in foreign lands. They paid in sleepless nights, wondering which vassal might be whispering to a rival, which alliance might be fraying, which oath might be weaker than it appeared. The feudal system was not a ladder. It was a web, and everyone caught in it struggled. There is a particular cruelty in how fealty passed through generations. A son did not simply inherit land. He inherited obligation. The moment his father died, the son knelt before the same lord, swore the same words, accepted the same chains. There was no escape through blood, no freedom through birth. The oath renewed itself endlessly, a curse handed down like a family name. And if a son refused, if a young man looked at his father's broken body and said, "No, I will not kneel. I will not serve. I will not bleed for another man's wars," then he lost everything. The land his family had worked for generations, the home his ancestors had built, the future he might have given his own children. Refusal was annihilation. So sons knelt, and their sons after them. Century after century, the oaths echoed through cold stone halls. The church blessed this system. Priests spoke of divine order, of the three estates, those who pray, those who fight, those who work. Thought each had a place, each had a duty. To question this order was to question God himself. And so, fealty became sacred. The oaths were sworn on relics, on Bibles, on fragments of saints' bones. To break such an oath was not merely treason against a lord. It was sin against heaven. This was the final weight, the spiritual cost. A man who betrayed his oath risked his immortal soul. Hell awaited the disloyal, eternal fire for those who broke their word. And in an age when hell felt close, when demons lurked in shadows and damnation was preached every Sunday. This threat was real. It pressed down on every vassal, every knight, every lord. They were trapped by fear of earthly punishment and fear of divine wrath. Some men did break. History remembers them. The rebels, the traitors, the oath-breakers who decided that freedom was worth more than honor. Some succeeded. Most did not. Their stories ended in execution, in exile, in bloodlines extinguished, and names forgotten, because the medieval world was not built for rebellion. It was built for obedience, and fealty was the architecture of that obedience, invisible walls that kept every man in his place. The kneeling figure in the torchlit hall did not fully understand what he surrendered. How could he? He was taught from birth that this was life, that oaths were sacred, that service was virtue. He spoke the words because his father spoke them, and his father before him. But the cost was his, always his labor, his blood, his freedom, his future, all of it poured into a system that gave back only enough to keep him alive and kneeling. This was the real price of fealty, not glory, not honor, not the brotherhood of arms that poets sang about in warm halls while snow fell outside. The price was a life that was never truly lived, a life borrowed from lords and kings and the grinding machinery of medieval power. And when that life ended, often too soon, often violently, the oath finally released its grip. Death was the only freedom the feudal world truly offered. The torches gutter, the hall falls silent, and somewhere another man kneels to speak the ancient words. The cycle begins again.